I am Alexander, son of Philip, king of Macedon, and on the first day of October in the year 331 before the Common Era, I stood upon the plains of Gaugamela and faced the greatest army the world had ever assembled. Darius III, the king of kings, the Shahanshah of Persia, had gathered every warrior from every corner of his vast empire to destroy me. They stretched across the horizon like an ocean of bronze and steel, perhaps 200,000 men, cavalry from Bactria, chariots from Mesopotamia, elephants from India, the immortals of Persia itself. Behind them lay the wealth of nations, the accumulated power of 2 centuries of Persian dominance. I had 40,000 men. But I had something Darius did not possess. I had absolute certainty that I would win. The Persian Empire had stood for over 200 years. It had crushed the Greeks at Thermopylae, burned Athens, and dominated the known world from Egypt to India. Darius commanded resources I could barely comprehend, gold beyond counting, cities that could field armies larger than my entire force, a military tradition that had conquered civilizations. His predecessors had built an empire that seemed eternal, unshakable, ordained by the gods themselves. But empires do not fall to those who respect them. They fall to those who see through their illusions of invincibility. After I had crushed the Persian forces at Granicus and humiliated Darius at Issus, I knew that one more great victory would shatter the empire forever. Darius had fled from me once already, abandoning his family, his wealth, and his dignity. He had sued for peace, offering me half his empire, his daughter's hand, and treasures beyond imagination. My general Parmenion had counseled acceptance. If I were Alexander, he said, I would take this offer. So would I replied, if I were Parmenion. I did not march across the known world to rule half an empire. I marched to rule all of it. I marched to achieve what no Greek had ever achieved. To bring the barbarian hordes of Asia under Hellenic civilization, to spread Greek culture and philosophy to the edges of the earth, to become not just king of Macedon but lord of the entire world. Darius's offer was an insult, an attempt to buy off a conqueror with scraps from his table. I rejected it with contempt and sent word that I would take everything he possessed, including his throne. So Darius prepared for one final confrontation. He chose the battlefield carefully, the plains of Gaugamela near Arbela, vast and flat, perfect for his cavalry and chariots. He had the ground leveled and smoothed, removing obstacles that might impede his forces. He positioned his army in a formation designed to envelope and crush mine through sheer weight of numbers. He placed his scythed chariots at the front, deadly machines with blades extending from their wheels, meant to tear through infantry formations. He positioned his cavalry on both flanks, massive forces meant to sweep around and attack from all sides. In the center, he placed his infantry, Greeks who fought for Persian gold, Persian regulars, and the immortals, elite warriors who had never known defeat. It was a trap of overwhelming force. Darius wanted me to see his army, to comprehend my insignificance before his might, and to despair. Any rational commander would have avoided battle, would have continued guerrilla warfare, would have waited for reinforcements or sought another way. But I have never been accused of excessive rationality. I have been accused of madness, of recklessness, of divine inspiration, but never of caution. When my scouts reported the size of Darius's army, my generals were troubled. Parmenion, my most experienced commander, expressed concern about our flanks being turned by the superior Persian cavalry. Craterus worried about the scythed chariots breaking our formations. Hephaestion questioned whether we should wait for reinforcements. They were good men, loyal and brave, but they thought like generals. I thought like a god. I studied the reports of Darius's formations carefully. I had spies in the Persian camp, deserters who brought me information, scouts who observed their preparations. I learned that Darius had stationed himself in the center, surrounded by his best troops, commanding from a chariot from which he could see the entire battlefield. This was proper Persian military doctrine. The king commands from the center, protected by layers of elite troops, directing the battle like a chess player moving pieces. But this arrangement revealed Darius's fatal weakness. He had fled from me at Issus when my cavalry had broken through to threaten him personally. He was no coward, he was brave enough, but he was a king who understood kingship as a sacred trust, a divine responsibility. If the king fell, the empire fell. Persian doctrine held that the king must be preserved at all costs, even if it meant abandoning the battle. This was civilized, reasonable, and completely wrong for facing an enemy like me. I decided that I would not fight the Persian army, I would fight Darius himself. If I could reach him, if I could threaten him personally, he would flee again. And if Darius fled, his army would collapse, no matter how vast, no matter how powerful. The whole vast machinery of the Persian Empire rested on a single man, and that man's nerve had already been broken at Issus. On the night before the battle, my generals expected me to be awake, planning, worrying. Instead, I slept. I slept deeply and peacefully, secure in my destiny. When Parmenion came to wake me before dawn, he found me so deeply asleep that he had to shake me repeatedly. "How can you sleep as if you had already won?" he asked, amazed. "But I have already won," I told him. Yesterday, I did not know where Darius was or what he intended. I might have had to chase him across Asia for years. But now he has given me everything I need. He has come to me, chosen a battlefield, and arranged his forces in a formation I can exploit. The battle is already decided. We need only enact what fate has ordained. This was not mere bravado. I genuinely believed it. Some call it supreme confidence, others call it madness. I call it understanding. I had studied warfare since I could walk. Aristotle himself had taught me philosophy, strategy, and the nature of power. My father Philip had forged me into a weapon of conquest. I had trained with the Macedonian phalanx, learned cavalry tactics from the Thessalians, studied the campaigns of every great general in history. I knew warfare in my bones, in my blood, in my soul. More than that, I knew myself. I knew that I would ride faster, strike harder, dare more greatly than any opponent. I knew that my men would follow me anywhere, not just because I commanded them but because they believed in me, because they had seen me fight at the front of every charge, share every hardship, never ask them to do what I would not do myself. I knew that when I pointed my lance toward Darius and kicked my horse into a gallop, nothing in this world would stop me from reaching him. As dawn broke on October 1st, 331 BCE, I assembled my army. I had positioned my forces during the night, moving them to the right of where Darius expected me to be, forcing him to adjust his formations. This was the first move in my strategy: keep him reacting, keep him uncertain, never let him settle into the battle he had planned. My army was arranged in what would become known as my characteristic formation. On the right wing, I commanded the companion cavalry, the elite mounted warriors of Macedon, the finest cavalry in the world. These were noble Macedonians, men I had trained with since boyhood, warriors who would ride into the fires of hell if I led them. Behind us were the Hypaspists, elite infantry who could fight in close formation or open order as needed. In the center was the phalanx, that magnificent Macedonian invention, rows of men holding sarissas, 18-foot pikes that created an impenetrable wall of spear points. No cavalry could charge the phalanx head-on, no infantry could break through that forest of steel. On my left wing, I placed Parmenion with the Thessalian cavalry and allied contingents. His orders were simple: hold. No matter what happened, no matter how many Persians attacked him, he was to hold his position and prevent the Persian cavalry from enveloping our army. Parmenion was experienced and reliable. I knew he would not fail, though I also knew he would face the hardest fight of the day. I had also prepared surprises for Darius's scythed chariots. I instructed my infantry to open lanes when the chariots charged, letting them pass through harmlessly, then closing ranks behind them. Those chariots that did not pass through would be targeted by javelin throwers and archers I had positioned for that purpose. The scythed chariot was a weapon of terror more than effectiveness, terrifying to face, but easily defeated by disciplined troops who did not panic. As the sun climbed higher, both armies stood facing each other across the plain. The scale was overwhelming. Darius's forces extended far beyond both my flanks, a sea of warriors that seemed to have no end. My men could see they were outnumbered, perhaps by 5 to 1. Some were afraid. That was natural. Only fools feel no fear before battle. I rode along the front lines on Bucephalus, my black warhorse, companion of countless battles. I spoke to my men, not with grand speeches about glory and duty, but with simple truths. You have beaten the Persians before, I told them. At Granicus, we crushed them. At Issus, we broke them. Today will be no different. They have numbers, but we have discipline. They have mercenaries, we have brothers. They have a king who runs, we have a king who fights. Stay in formation, trust the men beside you, and follow me. By sunset, we will feast in Darius's tent. Then I did something that shocked both my men and the Persians watching from across the field. Instead of advancing directly toward the Persian center, I began marching my army to the right, parallel to the Persian line but angling away from them. This was unprecedented, bizarre, seemingly mad. Darius had prepared the ground directly in front of him, had positioned his forces for a head-on collision. Now I was refusing to give him that battle, moving to my right, threatening to leave the prepared ground entirely and force the Persians to fight on rough terrain they had not cleared. Darius had to respond. He could not let me escape to the right, could not let me choose my own ground. He ordered his left wing to advance, to block my movement, to push me back toward the center where his trap waited. This was exactly what I wanted. I wanted him reacting to me, wanted his formations to shift, wanted gaps to open in his line. As the Persian left wing moved to block me, I saw the gap I had been waiting for. In the Persian center, between the main body of infantry and the cavalry moving to my right, a seam had opened, not large, but enough. The perfect formation Darius had arranged was beginning to fragment under the stress of adjustment. I turned to Philotas, commander of my companion cavalry, and to Hephaestion, my dearest friend and finest cavalry officer. When I give the signal, we strike there, I said, pointing at the gap. We drive straight for Darius. We ignore everything else. We do not stop, we do not turn aside, we do not engage their flanks. We go for the king. Meanwhile, Darius unleashed his scythed chariots. 200 of these deadly machines thundered toward my lines, wheels flashing with blades, meant to shred my phalanx before the infantry engagement even began. My men executed their training perfectly. The phalanx opened lanes, and most chariots passed through harmlessly, their drivers confused and unable to inflict casualties. Those chariots that tried to plow directly into the formations were met with javelins and arrows. Within minutes, the great chariot assault had failed completely, accomplishing nothing except to litter the battlefield with wrecked vehicles and dying horses. On my left, Parmenion faced the main Persian cavalry assault. Thousands of horsemen crashed into his positions, trying to envelope our left flank and attack the phalanx from behind. The fighting there was desperate, vicious, a grinding melee where Persian numbers began to tell. Parmenion sent messengers to me requesting support, warning that he might be overwhelmed. I sent back a message that must have seemed insane: hold. I will send you support soon, in the form of victory. I would not weaken my striking force to reinforce the left. Parmenion would have to endure, to trust that my plan would work, to hold long enough for me to win the battle. The moment had come. The Persian center was extended, the gap was clear, and Darius sat in his chariot watching his flanks advance, confident that his superior numbers would soon envelope and destroy my small army. He had no idea what was about to strike him. I raised my lance high, letting my men see it glinting in the sun. Then I kicked Bucephalus into motion, not a trot, not a canter, but immediately into a full gallop. Behind me, the companion cavalry and the hypaspists followed, and behind them, the right side of the phalanx began to advance in echelon, each unit following the one to its right, creating an arrow formation with me at the tip. We crashed into the Persian line like a thunderbolt. My lance took the first man through the throat, I drew my sword and killed the second. Around me, my companions were hacking and slashing, driving forward with irresistible momentum. We did not fight individual combats. We were a moving wall of destruction, always pressing forward, always toward the center where Darius waited. The Persians tried to close the gap, tried to stop our charge, but we had caught them in the middle of repositioning, and they could not form a solid line quickly enough. The phalanx behind us widened the breach, holding the flanks while we drove deeper. Every second carried us closer to the Persian king. Darius saw us coming. He saw the Macedonian cavalry smashing through his guards, saw me at the head of the charge, saw the same scenario that had terrorized him at Issus. He was surrounded by his immortals, protected by his elite guards, positioned in the safest place on the battlefield. It did not matter. Once again, he saw Alexander of Macedon charging directly at him, and once again, his nerve broke. He turned his chariot and fled. The King of Kings, the Shahanshah, the ruler of the greatest empire on earth, abandoned his army and ran for his life. His personal guards tried to protect his retreat, and they died bravely, but their king was already gone, whipping his horses into a desperate gallop away from the battlefield. The effect was electric. Persian soldiers near the center saw their king fleeing and lost heart. The immortals, who had never been defeated, watched their divine king run and realized the gods had abandoned them. Unit by unit, the Persian center began to collapse. Some fought on bravely, but most simply dissolved, running after their king or scattering across the plain. On my left, Parmenian's situation had become critical. The Persian cavalry had actually broken through his lines in several places and was threatening to envelope the entire Macedonian rear. But now, with the Persian center collapsing, those cavalry units suddenly found themselves isolated, their own center gone, their king fled. They began to withdraw, to flee, to save themselves. The entire Persian army disintegrated within the span of an hour. What had been the greatest military force ever assembled became a mob of terrified men running for their lives. My cavalry pursued, cutting down those who resisted, capturing those who surrendered. The plain of Gaugamela became a slaughterhouse. I wanted to pursue Darius personally, to capture him and end this war once and for all, but I received another urgent message from Parmenion. Despite the Persian collapse, his wing was still engaged with Persian and Indian cavalry who had not received word of their king's flight. I had to turn back, had to support my left wing before they were overwhelmed. By the time I fought my way through to Parmenion and helped him crush the remaining Persian resistance, Darius had gained too much of a head start. I pursued him for 75 miles that day and night, but he had fled too quickly, abandoning his chariot when it became stuck, mounting a horse and riding into the darkness. Once again, he escaped me, but once again, he left everything behind, his army, his equipment, his treasure, his dignity. The Battle of Gaugamela was over. In a single afternoon, I had destroyed the Persian Empire. Not defeated it, not damaged it, but destroyed it utterly. The army that was supposed to crush me had been annihilated. Darius would never raise another force capable of facing me. The road to Babylon, to Susa, to Persepolis, to the heart of the Persian Empire, lay open before me. Some victories are tactical. Some are strategic. This was existential. I had not merely won a battle, I had ended an era of history. The Persian Empire, which had dominated the world for 2 centuries, was finished. The age of Persian supremacy was over. The age of Macedonian conquest had begun. My casualties were light, fewer than 500 men killed, though many more wounded. The Persians lost tens of thousands on the field and tens of thousands more in the pursuit. More importantly, they lost their army, their cohesion, their ability to resist. After Gaugamela, I did not conquer the Persian Empire, I simply collected it, city by city, province by province, each one opening its gates or falling quickly to siege. But the true victory was not military, it was psychological. I had broken Darius's spirit, broken the Persian will to resist, broken the myth of Persian invincibility. I had proven that Asian numbers could not stand against Macedonian discipline, that Persian wealth could not buy victory over Macedonian valor, that the greatest empire on earth could be conquered by a king who refused to accept the word impossible. After the battle, My men found Darius's tent, a palace of silk and gold that housed luxuries beyond our imagination. There were baths drawn, food prepared, treasures piled high. Darius had been so confident of victory that he had prepared a victory feast. I allowed my men to plunder it, to taste the wealth we had won. Then I sat in Darius's chair, ate from Darius's table, and said to my companions, "So this is what it means to be a king." But I did not linger. Darius was still alive, still technically king, still capable of rallying resistance. I had to pursue him, to capture him, to formally end the Persian Empire. I marched to Babylon, the greatest city of the ancient world, and its gates opened before me without resistance. The priests of Marduk proclaimed me the rightful king of Babylon, successor to Nebuchadnezzar and Hammurabi. I performed the necessary rituals, honored their gods, and secured the loyalty of the city. Then I marched to Susa, where the Persian kings had kept their administrative capital. The treasure I found there was beyond comprehension, 50,000 talents of gold and silver, the accumulated wealth of centuries of conquest and taxation. It took thousands of mules and camels to transport it. With that gold, I could pay my army for 100 years, bribe every king in Asia, build cities that would bear my name until the end of time. But Susa was not enough. I marched to Persepolis, the ceremonial capital, the heart of Persian power, the city where Persian kings were crowned and Persian glory was celebrated. When I arrived, the city's defenders fled or surrendered. I entered Persepolis in January of 330 BCE, walking through gates that no foreign conqueror had ever breached. I allowed my men to sack Persepolis. Some say this was revenge for the Persian burning of Athens 150 years earlier. Some say I was drunk and ordered it on a whim. The truth is simpler. I wanted to send a message to all of Asia that the old order was dead, that Persian power was finished, that a new master ruled the world. When Persepolis burned, everyone from Egypt to India knew that the Persian Empire had truly ended. But I also showed mercy and strategy. I did not kill the Persian nobles who surrendered. I did not destroy their culture or religion. I adopted Persian customs when appropriate, appointed Persian governors, married Persian women. I wanted to be not just the conqueror of Persia but the legitimate successor to the Persian throne. I wanted the Persians to see me not as a foreign invader but as their rightful king. This caused friction with my Macedonian companions. They had marched across the world to defeat the Persians, not to become them. When I began wearing Persian dress, when I adopted the ceremony of proskynesis, the Persian custom of bowing before the king. When I married Roxana, a Bactrian princess, some of my generals grumbled that I had become too Asian, that I had forgotten my Macedonian roots. I had not forgotten. But I understood something they did not: you cannot rule an empire by force alone. You need legitimacy. You need the conquered to accept you as their rightful ruler. The Persians would never accept a Macedonian barbarian as their king, but they might accept Alexander, king of Macedon and Asia, legitimate successor to the Achaemenid dynasty, husband to Eastern royalty, adopter of Persian customs. I still had to deal with Darius. He had fled east into his remaining provinces, trying to rally support for one more stand. But his own nobles had lost faith in him. Bessus, the satrap of Bactria, and other eastern nobles arrested Darius, planning to use him as a bargaining chip with me or to kill him and claim kingship themselves. I pursued them relentlessly. I wanted Darius alive, I wanted to capture him, to treat him honorably, to show the world that I was a legitimate successor, not just a conqueror. When I finally caught up with Bessus's party, I found Darius dead, stabbed by his own nobles and left in a cart by the side of the road. I was genuinely moved. Darius had been my enemy, but he had been a king, and he had died ignobly at the hands of traitors. I had his body treated with full royal honors, sent back to Persepolis for burial with his ancestors. I declared Bessus a traitor and regicide, and I spent the next years hunting him across Central Asia until I captured him and had him executed in traditional Persian fashion for the murder of a king. With Darius dead, I was now unquestionably the king of Asia. There was no rival claimant, no legitimate Persian royal to rally resistance. I was the great king, the Shahanshah, the lord of the four quarters of the world. At 30 years old, I had accomplished what no Greek had ever dreamed possible. I had conquered the Persian Empire in its entirety. But I did not stop. I could not stop. Some called it ambition, some called it madness, some called it divine destiny. I called it unfinished business. If I was to rule the world, I had to conquer all the world. Bessus had fled to Bactria and beyond. There were Indian kingdoms past the Hindu Kush. There were lands beyond Persia that had never submitted to any empire. I marched my army into Central Asia, into regions where even the Persians had exercised only nominal control. I founded cities, Alexandria Escate, Alexandria the furthest, to mark the edges of civilization. I fought guerrilla campaigns against Scythian nomads who refused to submit to any king. I conquered Sogdiana and Bactria, regions that had resisted Persian control for generations. Then I turned toward India. The land beyond the Indus had always fascinated me. Aristotle had told me stories of the Indian sages, of their wisdom and their strange customs. I wanted to reach the edge of the world, to see the great ocean that, according to Greek geography, encircled all lands. I wanted to conquer kingdoms that had never heard of Macedon or Greece or Persia. I crossed the Hindu Kush in the dead of winter, a feat many considered impossible. I invaded India, defeated King Porus at the Battle of the Hydaspes despite his war elephants and superior numbers. I pushed deeper into India, crossing rivers, conquering kingdoms, always moving east. But finally, my army said no. After 11 years of continuous campaigning, after marching from Macedon to the Indus, after conquering the greatest empire the world had known, my men refused to go further. At the Hyphasis River, my soldiers mutinied, not violently, but simply by refusing to march another step east. They wanted to go home. They wanted to see their families. They wanted to enjoy the wealth and glory they had won. I was furious. I raged at them for 3 days, refusing to see anyone, threatening to march east with anyone who would follow me. But in the end, I yielded. Even Alexander the Great could not conquer the world alone. If my army would not follow, I could not continue. We turned back, though I made sure to find another route home, exploring south down the Indus River, conquering new territories even in retreat. The journey back was harder than the conquest. We faced hostile tribes, deadly deserts, supply failures. Crossing the Gadrosian Desert nearly destroyed my army, thousands died of thirst and heat. It was the worst disaster of my entire campaign, worse than any battle. But we survived, we reached Babylon, and I began the work of organizing my empire. But I had changed. The boy who had crossed into Asia at 22 was gone. The man who returned at 32 was harder, more suspicious, more prone to anger. I had executed generals for treason, real or imagined. I had killed Clitus the Black, one of my oldest friends, in a drunken rage when he criticized me. I had adopted more Persian customs, alienating more of my Macedonian companions. I had developed a god complex, insisting on being recognized as the son of Zeus, demanding worship as a living deity. My men still followed me, how could they not, after all we had accomplished together, but the easy camaraderie of the early campaigns was gone. I was no longer Alexander their companion, I was Alexander their god-king, distant and terrible. I had one more great ambition, to conquer Arabia, to complete the circle of empire around the Mediterranean and Middle East. I was preparing the campaign, assembling fleets, gathering intelligence, when I fell ill. It was June of 323 BCE. I was 32 years old, master of the world, and I developed a fever that would not break. For 12 days I grew weaker. My generals gathered around my bedside, asking who would succeed me, who would inherit the empire I had built. According to legend, I replied, to the strongest, though I cannot remember if I truly said those words or if they were invented later to justify the wars that followed. On June 10, 323 BCE, I died in Babylon, the city I had made my capital, surrounded by my companions, master of an empire that stretched from Greece to India. I was 32 years old. I have been dead for over 2,000 years now, yet men still speak my name. They call me Alexander the Great. They study my battles, debate my legacy, argue over whether I was a genius or a madman, a liberator or a tyrant. They build statues of me, write books about me, teach their children about the man who conquered the world. But do they understand what I truly achieved at Gaugamela? It was not just a military victory, though it was perhaps the most decisive battle in history. It was not just the conquest of an empire, though I ended 200 years of Persian dominance. It was proof of an idea, that one man, with enough will and courage and genius, could change the world. I was 25 years old when I faced Darius at Gaugamela. I was outnumbered 5-1. Every rational calculation said I should lose, should retreat, should accept Darius's generous offer and rule half an empire. But I did not believe in rational calculations. I believed in destiny, in my own divine right to rule, in the certainty that I could not fail because the gods themselves had marked me for greatness. Was I right? Did the gods truly favor me? Or was I simply extraordinarily lucky, facing an enemy whose king would flee rather than die, whose empire was already weakening from internal contradictions, whose time had simply come to an end? I cannot answer that question. I believed in my divinity, but belief does not make truth. What I know is this: I saw what I wanted, the conquest of Asia, and I let nothing stop me. Not numbers, not distance, not exhaustion, not fear, not the advice of wiser men. I rode straight at the heart of the Persian Empire, and I did not stop until I had torn that heart out. At Gaugamela, I did not merely defeat an army. I defeated an idea, the idea that Persia was invincible, that the East could not be conquered by the West, that some things were simply too great for any man to achieve. I proved that with enough courage and enough will, anything is possible. That is my legacy. Not the empire, which divided into squabbling kingdoms after my death. Not the cities I founded, though many still bear my name. Not the territories I conquered, which are now ruled by peoples who barely remember I existed. My legacy is the idea that greatness is achievable, that the impossible can be made possible, that one man with a vision can change the course of history. I am Alexander of Macedon, Alexander the Great, and on the plains of Gaugamela, I shattered an empire and forged a legend that will live forever.